Well, guys, an unexpected name was placed on waivers yesterday, and his name was Kiefer Bellows, essentially. And it came to shock. It came to a shock for many, especially New York Islanders fans who had a lot of praise for him and thought that he was going to be a pivotal part for the New York Islanders' future moving forward. And as soon as he got placed, people were saying, Lula Morello needs to get his ass fired, and there were just so many attacks towards him. They were suggesting other players that should have been on the move, traded, or placed on waivers before Bellows was even considered an option. We all knew the moment he was placed on waivers that he was going to be claimed. Did we think
Yep.
that the Philadelphia Flyers, who are currently in the top 15, would have been that team? I had no idea that it would have been a team like Philadelphia. I thought it would have been a lower ranked team like maybe the Arizona Coyotes, for example, or the Chicago Blackhawks. Um, but the San Jose Sharks, or you could just name a lot of teams that are struggling right now. Even the
Yep.
anyways, but essentially this guy, you know, was a first round pick, first round pick in 2016, 19th overall. And in terms of his stats, 68 NHL games in the last 4 seasons up to this date, 11 goals, 14 assists for a total of 25 goals. His best season was in 2021, 2022. He had 45 games played, 6 goals, 13 assists, and 19 points. So, Luca, do you believe that he will have an impact and finally find this game with the Philadelphia Flyers under a guy like John Tortorella?
I mean, I think it's a tough thing to say because I don't actually know if he will have an impact or not. I think he's a good player. I mean, look, he was drafted 19th overall in 2016. He's got the potential to be a decent player. He's 24 years old and he hasn't really panned out in the Islanders system. But in 21-22, he played 45 games. He had 19 points. There was an optimism there, right? He signed that 1 year deal at $1.2 million, and he it looked like, okay, this he's finally going to be able to get himself and establish himself into a legit NHLer. And then he kind of sort of struggles and doesn't really I believe doesn't even make it on the opening night roster. Ends up being scratched and stuff, and we kind of see a big issue here because it looks like Lane Lambert wasn't a huge fan of him, right? And so I think that there was a lot of issues there. But I'm just gonna read an article that was made by Steven Rosner, a former guest of the show, on New York Islanders Hockey Now. He says that Kiefer Bellows' strength is his shot, and something he has added to his game has been his physicality. Something he does not have is his speed. And when you look at the moves that Lane Lambert made this weekend, one could say that Bellows did not bring enough speed to provide the spark for Saturday. Hence, the move to go with Nikita Soshnikov instead. And if Lambert wanted physicality on Sunday, he went with the more physical player. So I think that in this situation, what it looks like is a situation where Lane Lambert just wasn't a fan of his speed and his physicality. And he felt like there were other players in the lineup that just seemed to have a better impact on the team. And, we talked about Kiefer Bellows for a while. There's been a lot of talk about Kiefer Bellows for a while about, him potentially needing a change of scenery. I think under John Tortorella, he's able to potentially get, the best out of his players. I don't know if Kiefer Bellows is going to turn into a top six forward, but he could be a serviceable NHLer for sure, with the right coaching and with the right system. So I'm curious to see what he does in Philly. I think it's going to be exciting for him, and hopefully he's able to stick from the beginning and make a permanent move there.
Well, look, they have a couple of forwards that are out right now. Patrick Brown, Bobby Brink, James Van Riemsdyk, oh my God, James Van Riemsdyk, Cam
Yep.
Atkinson, and Sean Couturier. So, I mean, obviously, it makes sense for him to be picked up with all those injuries. A couple of days ago, they picked up Lucas Sedlak as well, on waivers. So, obviously, they're trying to patch up the holes. But in terms of a guy like Kiefer Bellows, who there was high regard towards him, especially being regarded as one of the best prospects for the New York Islanders at some point. A lot of people were upset, and he is a left winger. I do see him probably being put on the second line, where maybe a guy like Scott Lawton and Owen Tippett. See how that works out. If not, I see him on the third line. Um, Fourth line, I mean, I think it's pretty much established right now. But I mean, then again, we'll see what happens. I just think that he needs to be put in a position to succeed. So in the top six is where I see him. They have nothing to lose. The Philadelphia Flyers are off to a pretty impressive start. Nothing crazy, it's only a couple games within the season. But I do think, especially under a guy like John Tortorella, who's going to take him under his wing and really try to coach him to the best of his abilities, because he's a coach that wants the best from his players, right? So I
Yeah.
think Kiefer Bellows will succeed in the Philadelphia Flyer system. He's an RFA, which is even um, a lot more desirable for the Flyers to pick him up because they have his rights, so at the end of the season. So, I mean, if it doesn't work out, maybe, trade him as well for like a conditional pick or just a regular pick, or maybe even for another RFA. But what I love about this is that they got a player for dirt cheap, like Angelo
Uh-huh.
stated in our chat, with value essentially, and essentially because of the logjam on the Islanders team right now, especially with some pretty bad contracts. Kiefer Bellows fell victim to be placed on waivers, and I do think that he will do well with Philly. What is his range essentially? Well, I would say 20 to 30 points. I'm not going to go all crazy and stuff. So he will have an impact because, that will be, a very good, impression, heading into his final year, which he will be an RFA at the end of the year. So obviously he's gonna play for that contract. He's gonna play to prove that he still has worth, and he's gonna prove to everybody why he was selected 19 overall in the first round, why he's a first round caliber player. So those are my thoughts essentially. People could disagree with me, but I do believe in Kiefer Bellows, and it's somebody that I wish that was given more of an opportunity in the Islanders system.
I think what's interesting with Kiefer Bellows is that there was a lot of people that when he was placed on waivers were surprised, and I think when that happens, usually it means that this guy's a really good player, and we're surprised that he ends up there. But kind of like the Nicholas Baudin trade that the Canadians made, the same day, well, last yesterday, it was a deal that I think people were kind of surprised about. Like when Baudin was placed on waivers, they were surprised about you know why he sorry, when Bellows was placed on waivers, people were surprised that he was placed on waivers, and even the same thing when Baudin got traded to the Habs. And I think that we're starting to see here a lot of depth guys and a lot of guys that are potentially fighting for NHL spots being moved around a little bit over here. And it's kind of interesting to see. But just one quote that I want to take from the article of the New York Islanders article, again from Stefan Rosner. He says that in the interview that he had with Kiefer Bellows, he says, I'm confident that I can play. I just got to be given, let out there. And once I do that, then I think good things will come. He's basically saying that he needs to be able to go out there and play his game. And I think he feels like in New York, he wasn't given the opportunity to play his game. I think he was given an opportunity that he had to play a system, and he wasn't able to play freely. And I think he wants to be able to play freely and be able, make mistakes and not be judged for it, I guess. But let's see how John Tortorella does that. And one other thing that I want to mention too is Stefan Rosner did also say that he felt that had Kiefer Bellows not been claimed off waivers, that potentially a deal was in place for him to go and get traded somewhere else. So I'm kind of curious to know, what other teams potentially you guys think that he could have potentially ended up in if it wasn't Philly. But I do think that Philly makes a lot of sense. I know that Habs fans were upset that he didn't end up in Montreal, but Montreal has
Habs
so many
fans want
forwards.
everybody on that goes through
Habs have too
waivers.
many forwards, so it wouldn't have made sense anyways. But
Yeah,
I think Kiefer Bellows in general, I think a good move, and heading to Philly especially, it makes a lot of sense for Philly, and it makes a lot of sense for him, and I
good
think
move.
he's gonna do pretty well.
Yeah, and like Luca was saying, guys being placed on waivers then immediately traded, for example, right? So that could have
Yeah,
been Kiefer Bellows if he did not clear waivers. We saw that with the Costin trade between the Blues and the Oilers.
yep.
We've been seeing this, already, these types of transactions. So it's not the end, in my opinion. I think more moves will be made, especially with a lot of teams against the cap and a lot of young guys pushing for an NHL roster spot. So, I mean, the kids got to play, right? So I think that's what it is.
100%.
And the Flyers are a depleted team due to injury. So, they capitalize on that cap space. They capitalize on that, that spot. And Bellows needs to prove why he deserves to be in the NHL and why he's better than some of the players currently on the lineup. So when those injured players come back, he's guaranteed a spot. automatically. So we'll see what happens.
I think he's got to earn it too, though.
Yeah.
John Tortorella is a coach that doesn't take things lightly. He's a very demanding coach, and he expects a lot out of his players. And I think Kiefer Bellows, I think, should be motivated that he's being given an opportunity. But I think that he needs to seize that opportunity as well because as much as Lane Lambert probably didn't see the best in him or didn't trust him, you can lose the trust of John Tortorella really quickly. And if you lose the trust of John Tortorella really quickly, just ask Anthony Duclair how his tenure was when he lost the trust of John Tortorella. So I think that there needs to be a situation here where Philly needs to put him in a position to succeed, but also Kiefer Bellows needs to seize this opportunity because if he doesn't, he may never get another NHL contract again, and he may end up just being an
He's
AHLer,
24 years old, age is
right?
catching up to him essentially. So it's
That's
now
it.
or never.
That's it. He doesn't have, like people are gonna say, oh, he's still young enough to develop. He is, but it's gonna come to a point where that's what he's gonna end up being, right? And so he's at a point where it's like it's got to basically be now or never for him. And I hope that he can, find his game and hopefully be able to reach that potential, at least of being a third liner in the NHL with the
Yeah.
Philadelphia Flyers. Because I don't want to go too far and say he's going to be a top six guy.
No.
I think a third liner makes a lot of sense for him, and if he can do that on a team like Philly, that could work out. But also, what's interesting too, a lot of waiver claims end up doing really well. An example, and I know I'm going to go back to Montreal, but it's a good example. Paul Byron ended up on waivers, came to Montreal, and he was a really good player
Brent
for them.
Pitlick is another
You know,
Montrealer.
that's it. So I think that if Kiefer Bellows can turn into kind of what Paul Byron was in Montreal for the Philadelphia Flyers, I think Philly fans are going to be happy about that, and I think we
Yeah.
should be.
And honestly, with that being said, guys, we would like to hear from you guys. The Islanders fans, are you guys really sad? Is this a huge loss? Who else would you have rather placed on waivers or traded? And if you would have traded, Bellows as opposed to just placing on waivers, what would you expect in return? And also for the Philadelphia Flyers fans, are you excited with your rival Bellows? What are your thoughts on him? What are your predictions in this upcoming season for Bellows? Where do you see him playing? How many points? We like to hear all about that. And guys, if you like Bet99, fantasy hockey, casino games, football games, whatever, the link is in our description below. You guys could click that link, use our code YoungGuns1, and you must be 19 years old in order to play. So you guys have to play responsibly as well. And the Mind Foundation Canada, if you guys want to donate to a nice charity that are focused on neurological diseases and disorders, you guys click on the link as well and donate. But guys, if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel, and share to any hockey fan that hasn't seen our channel yet. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Young Guns podcast.